In my previous video, I was talking about backend development, and I also gave you a good project idea to build out the vehicle's API. And in this video, I'll be actually creating that API myself. So by the end of this video, you should be able to set up a project, understand what RESTful API is, also understand what authentication is and how it's important in any web application. And we'll be also talking to our database, so you get familiar with how create, insert, update, or deleting record actually works. So if you think this is something that you would like to watch, subscribe now and let's get to the video. So to accomplish this task, we are actually going to be using a FeathersJs framework, which is built on top of node.js. And this is actually the diagram of what we'll be building out today. We'll be using FeathersJs API to communicate to our front-end application. Well, in this case, we're not going to be using a front-end, actually. We'll be using Insomnia. I'll talk about that in a second. And we'll be also setting up a database. So we'll be able to see this entire flow. If you don't have Feathers installed right now, I would recommend for you to do that right now. If you're going to get started, it asks you or it tells you what you need to do in order to install it and get things going. Okay, so now let's go to our terminal. Oh, it's right here. Okay, let's see, what do I have in here? ls, okay, nothing. So first I'm going to create a directory where I want for my code to be in. So I'm just going to create a directory called API under DevPool. It seems to be appropriate. And what I'm going to do right now is run the feathers command. Feathers --help. So once you install it, if you're able to run this command, this is the list you should be able to see. It's a menu, instructions and the commands you can use with Feathers. So what I want right now is to create an application. So here we have app, create new Feathers application in your current folder. So let's do that. We'll type in Feathers, here says generate, or just G, space, app, enter. Okay, so here it's giving us options later that how do we want to set up our application. So for this purpose, I'll be using a JavaScript to make things simpler. Project name DevPool, that's fine. Description, none. Source, yes please. I'll be using Yarn. It's going to be a REST application. And what the REST application is you sending a request and respond back from API. That is something we'll be doing right now. And you'll be actually getting a JSON string later, JSON format. Jest is a testing tool. So let's just go with Jest. Would you like to authenticate? Yes. And we'll talk about that in a minute, what authentication is. ESLint is just to style our code. So here, since we selected authentication, yes, now it gives us options. How do we want to authenticate our users? Well, here we have, they can authenticate with username and password. We can use auth0, Google, Feathers, and etc, etc. So if you want to select any of other ones as well, you simply press on the space bar. So you can select multiple ones. But in this case, I just want to use username plus password on my local. So this is the service name I want to create called users. So here it gives us options to set up our database. For this, I'll be using NeedDB, but if you want to use MongoDB later on or Next.js, which is for Postgres, you surely can, of course, but I'll be using NeedDB. And what it will do, it will just create this connection string to my file that's going to be stored in my project. That is not something you want to do for your production or for your application that is meant for production or big use, but for just the purpose of a demonstration of how fast things we can set up and to understand how database work, this is what we're going to be doing using NeedDB. And here we're now creating our application. Now this process can take a few minutes, but also it will depend on how fast your computer is. And I kind of sometimes like to go over those scripts as well, because I'll know what's installed for me, what I didn't, and if I got specific wording like here. And the warning was, I believe, had to do with my socket IO. Excuse me. So while it's doing that, let's go ahead and you guys go ahead and install this tool, Insomnia tool. And what this Insomnia tool is, it will help us to replicate the behavior of a frontend. You know what I mean by replicate is, you know how when you're sending a request from the frontend to backend, you need to communicate with it. This Insomnia tool does just that. It will be sending requests and response back from our API. So we don't really have to even build our frontend. We can just simply use this tool, and that's what backend engineers do. So we don't even have to talk to front-end guys. We don't have to worry about the front-end at all. We separate our tasks. Okay, so let's see if that's been done. Okay, perfect. It's done. So now what I'm gonna do is say code space dot. In running that command, it should open me Visual Studio Code. If you don't have that installed already, I'll recommend for you to install it. Okay, and here's our project setup right now. If I were to go to a package.json right now, I'll delete this so you guys are not going to be able to see what I'm doing right now. It just puts the specific configurations like my personal credentials in there. I don't want to show it, so that's why I'm hiding this. Okay, so what we have inside of our package.json is scripts we can run in our terminal, as well as dependencies that have been installed for us. So you've probably seen some in the other tutorials where people will have to download NeedDB or some sort of a database separately onto their system in order to use it and talk to a database, of course. But in our case, FeathersJs did that out of the box. So we don't have to spend time configuring it. We don't have to spend time looking on the internet what a specific string is in order to install it. It just does it for us automatically. Now I see a small problem for me already. I'm using node.js and it's saying node 12 and I'm on node 14, which is interesting. Why? I think this is going to give us a problem, but let's find out. Well, since right now this thing is up and running, I'm just gonna, it's up to you actually at this point right now. You can reuse this terminal that you've been using before, or we can use the terminal right here inside here. And what we're gonna say is yarn dev to start our project. Okay, yes, so I knew it. So it gives us problem saying that the engine node isn't compatible with the module. Expected version 12 got 14. So this is what I have currently on my machine. And it's expecting to have 12, yeah. Now this is I'm not sure why is that. I think there's just a small bug in there, or I probably didn't update. No, I did update my feathers, so I'm not sure. But in any case, this should fix the problem. This should fix it. So there is something for me later to investigate, and I'll let you guys know what happened exactly in there. So that did solve the trick. And now we can see that our Feathers application has been started on localhost port 3030. So control click on it. And what it should do, it should open you a new tab in your browser saying localhost 3030. And here we go. Here's our Feathers application. Congratulations, we have actually set up our API application. So that's the first step, checkmark, done. Next, what we want to do is now we want to connect our API to our Insomnia. So let's go ahead and open up our Insomnia. I have it open up already in here. So yeah, make sure you download it, create a new workspace, and you'll be all caught up. Okay, so I already did, by the way, create an authentication folder. It's just empty users, it's empty. I just didn't want to spend time doing that. And what we want to do right now is actually to register a user. Well, actually, hold on. Let me show you first what Feathers actually did create for us. Let me go into users hooks. Hooks is something that's been called first in our application whenever users call a specific endpoint. So in our case, whenever users go in and try to do something with the user's endpoint, like trying to find all, trying to get, create update, patch, remove, they have to be authenticated. And that's including all, of course, as well. And the reason why to that is because we don't want for them to do something that they're not supposed to. So this is where it takes me to a point to talk about authentication a little bit. Whenever you go like on Facebook or Twitter, you need to log in first into an application in order to access your files out there, like pictures, text, and to make sure that you're not looking at somebody else's personal data. And that's what authentication is. It provides us with that type of a security, as well as we don't want to let some other strangers to let into our application if they're not registered, because then they can do whatever they want, really, and we don't want that. So that's why we have authentication in our application. And in order to know what actually we have for our authentication, is if I go into authentication.js, we can see here that if I were to use it, the type of authentication register it allows, I can pass in a JWT and local. And another way how you can know that is if you go into config default JSON, and here, authentication process. So it's using entity users, service users, and here are our strategies. We can use JWT, which is a token we'll be getting from the user, and the strategy needs to be local. Okay, so this is all good, and this is where our database is stored. So actually, let's go into our database right now, userdb. For now it's empty, that's fine, and this is just a small rule. So like where field name email has to be unique, true, yes. For now it's empty, there's nothing in there, so let's put some information in there. Let's create a user. The way we're gonna do that is, first create authentication folder inside of your Insomnia, right click on it and say new request, and we're gonna call it register. And the register is actually using a post request. Get is when you're trying to get something from API, and post is something you want to put into API. So that's what I want to do, post. Okay, that's good. However, if I try to do just send right now, it's still nothing, right? We need to connect our Insomnia to our API. And the way to do that, if you click on Control E, okay, it should open you this environment tab right here. And this is interesting where I have all this stuff. For you, it's going to be all empty like this. And let's do it all from scratch right now. Let's create a new JSON object in here. And the first key value pair we're gonna have is called base URL. So that's our key. And now we need to put in a value in there. And that value is a string of our current localhost and port number. So I'm just going to copy this guy right here, HTTP localhost 3030. And one thing to point out is whenever we do send the request and the get back a response, we're doing all this through HTTP request. Okay, so now we have our string in here, boop, done. And the nice thing about this tool, actually, that if I click here where we can see this URL written in there, as I start typing base, what happened? Base URL, it will autofill for me. Okay, so now I think I should be okay. Yeah, so now we can see we're actually talking to our API right now. I mean, of course, we got a 404 not found, which is correct. And here we can see that we got a request from our Insomnia. And think of Insomnia again as your front end. Whatever you have in here, let's say like if your body is empty, it's going to be empty for you in there. Whatever your header is, that's how your header will look like on your front end applications for specific endpoints, specific requests. So, okay, so we're trying to register a user. So I'm trying to register a user, which is actually a part of users services. So I'm gonna type in users, okay, send. Okay, it worked. So actually if I were to go in here right now, users DB, we can see, well, that's it worked. We did get a new data into our database, however, it's empty. What it is we're just missing a small validation on our API side. It's not a big deal. However, what I actually want to see an actual user. So let me click this button. I will select JSON and let me create a user right now. So the username, sorry, my bad, name, I want to call him James. And notice how whenever I create key value pair in the JSON format, I have double quotes around the key and the value. Okay. Next, I want to give him an email, and his email will be james@james.com, comma, and of course he needs to have a password. Okay, guys, his password is secret, so don't tell it to anybody, okay? Secret. Super secret. Okay, that's it. That's all I want to give for James right now. So if I click on send, there we have it. We actually just created our first user in our API. Congratulations. And what this ID is, you'll notice you have this underscore ID, some sort of garbage here. That is something that tells me that is something I can use to point to this James inside of our database. Because whenever we get records from our database API into our front end, we need to somehow tell them apart from each other. We can't really use name, we can't really rely on an email, so that's why we create a unique ID, and it's been hashed for us, so we can't really see what it is exactly. All we can see is this hashed code. And if I'll go back into our database right now, there we go, guys. We just created our first user. Congratulations. Next, what do I want to do right now? Well, what I want to do with this API actually is I want to store vehicles information, and I want to get vehicles information. I mean, that's the whole point of creating CRUD system, right? And again, do you guys remember what CRUD is? Create, read, update, delete record. And that's what every backend engineer actually knows how to do. And that's what we're going to do right now. Okay, so if I'll go back into our system, first, if you'll notice under services, so source services, we just have a users in there. We don't have vehicles service. So let's create that. Let's go back into our terminal right here. Let's type in our friendly feathers -help command, and let's see what options it gives us. So app, we just use that. Authentication, so if we didn't select authentication first time, we can do it again. Connection, hook, middleware, services. That looks interesting. Generate a new service. Bingo. This is actually what we want. So let's do that. FeathersJs service. Enter. And it's prompting us exact same information, what type of DB we want. Still need DB. And now it's going to be service name. So let's give it vehicles. And notice how I have an S at the end. I want to keep it as plural because whenever we navigate to our URL, it needs to go from many to one, which means you're going from non-specific to a very specific data. So we're going to say vehicles. Would you like to register on vehicles? Yes, please. Authentication, of course. I would like to be authenticated. Now it's creating DevPool, non-engine. Yes, same deal for us. But I think it still created everything for us. Yes, it did. Vehicles, hook, everything is there. So you can see right now, this time authenticated JWT is on all. And this is another thing I like to do. You see this code right here? We're not really using it. I mean, thanks FeathersJs that you created this code for us, but we don't need it. So I like to clean it up. Boop, boop, save, done. Save successfully, and the reason why is because I just want to know what my API does and it doesn't. And in fact, I can actually delete this part as well. Boop, save, done. Okay, so now let's go back into our Insomnia. And again, remember, Insomnia is like our front end that helps us to test our backend. So let's do exact same thing right now. Right click, new folder, or Shift Control N, and let's call it vehicles. And remember, by the way, the reason why I'm calling this vehicles, users, and authenticate is because it needs to match the names we have here. Remember that all those names are connected to each other. So vehicles is the vehicles folder, and right now, since we'll be creating the first request we'll be creating is a create request, it needs to match the create request we have on Feathers. And of course, it's still going to be post request. You guessed that correctly. And it needs to talk to our URL or to our endpoint API. And this time is going to be vehicles. We'll be calling our vehicles API. And since I'm trying to create something, I still need a JSON. And I'm going to cheat a little bit right now, actually. I have already typed out a few of my JSON formatted vehicles. So I'm just going to copy paste it. And of course, that didn't work so well. Okay, so I have fixed that. What do you guys is going to happen right now? We should be able to create it right now, right? Let's see. Let's send a request. Oh no, it didn't work. What are we going to do? Well, remember how users actually cannot access our API because they're not authenticated? So this is a validation right here. And this is actually what we want. If I'm a user who's trying to access your API, I should see this type of an error saying not authenticated. You have to log in. But since we already logged in before, oh, actually, no, sorry, we didn't. I'm sorry, my apologies. We didn't finish here, right here, at this step yet. We need to log in right now. So right click, new request, log in, and this time get request. And that's, oh, sorry, that's still post request. Okay, I'm going to change it later. So it's going to be our base URL. And this time, since I'm trying to log in, I'm not going to be using users because our login process goes through authentication. So what I have to do is authentication. I have to use authentication URL, base JSON, and I'll be logging in with the same user I just created it. Okay. James email password. We don't need a name for this part actually. All what we need is an email and password. Send the request. Method not found. Find. All right. Sorry, my apologies. I didn't change this to post yet. Send. Boom. Okay, it's working, but it's asking us to put one more property into our JSON. And remember what when I talked about authentication, it requires to have JWT and the local strategy. Well, this is what it is. So let's pass that in right now. Excuse me. So it's going to be strategy local. Send. And voila, guys. We just logged in as James into our API. Easy, right? To get to this type of a process, it takes people a couple of days to get here, but it took us a couple of minutes really. And I like this result because if I were to be asked to create an API with specific stuff in there, with specific features, thanks to Feathers.js, I'll be able to get to that point in no time. So I just saved myself a few days of work, essentially. So, excuse me. So what we're doing before, we're trying to create, not authenticated. If we try to send again, it still didn't work, which is accurate because we're not passing this access token right now. So with this request, we just got access token, some authentication information, so we can see strategy local, payload, and users information. So I'm gonna copy this access token right now. And remember guys, Control E to get to this environment window, comma, and I'm gonna create another value here, token, and passing our token in here, done. And the good thing about this environment tool is that I don't have to keep on copy pasting that URL over and over again. You can see right now it's just been stored in one place, and I can keep on accessing to it every time. I'll create authentication, bear token. I was creating token in the wrong place and we don't need it in there. Send the request. And okay, here we go. We just created our vehicle. Cool, right? This is one of the CRUD process. First one, C, create. So now let's duplicate this. So if I do Control D to duplicate, and let's do all this time. And all means let's get all of our records. Get all records, which means the request needs to be get. We're still on the vehicles, and this time we don't need to pass JSON there. It can be just nobody. Okay, so let's send that, and there we go, it worked. Cool. So what is this stuff? Total one, limits, keep. Well, total is how many records we currently have in our database. Limit is what is the maximum number I can get from our API. And that is something that has always been used with pagination. And pagination is, have you ever gone on a website where you have a list of items, but there is a limited number? So when you scroll all the way down to the page, you'll see numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4 to 100, where you can click on it, and every time you click on it, you'll get a new list of items. And that's where this thing comes in. We'll be using this technique to load a specific number of records per page, and that is accessible, or this is something that has been always set by default. So whenever we have a different request or different service, that is asking to get all of the records, by default is set to 10. And we can change this number, by the way. If you were to go to like config default, and you should be changing there, but we're not going to do that right now. Excuse me. So now we're able to get all of our records, but we don't have a lot of records. Let's create more records. So I'll do the same thing again at Tesla. Well, I know what happened last time. It's going to be a little bit faster if I just do this. Nice. We just create another vehicle, all, send. Awesome. So what we just did right now, whenever we send the request to get all these records, this is actually a REST API right now, because I have my client that is talking to our API, and we're getting data back in a JSON format. And I can actually filter this out as well in our URL. And the way I will do that is, if I'll just do like a question mark, and I'm gonna say brand equals to Tesla. So if I want to get to a specific record, this is what I'm gonna do: send the request, and here we go. We just filtered out our data. And that's quite cool, which means that whenever you go to any other API or REST API, and again, that's like if you go on Facebook, Twitter, Google, you can do exact same thing in there as well. So the one thing to point out though is, see how we have Tesla T in uppercase? Let me put into a lowercase. Send. We didn't get anything. And the reason why is because this part right now is case sensitive. So keep that in mind. So I would like to remove that for now. This is just something nice for you guys to know. Now, I'm not going to be creating update and delete. That is something for you guys to experiment with. And the thing you'll find later on is, let's go into our vehicles database right now. So we can see all of our vehicles information here. Awesome. And since we're working with the NeedDB, unfortunately, this database doesn't just update this specific record. It doesn't just delete this specific record. What it will do actually is, it will create you a second record right here with exact same ID, saying if it was deleted or if it was updated. So when you'll do that, if you see that's happening, don't worry, that's a appropriate behavior for NeedDB. But if you'll be using like MongoDB or Postgres, it will actually update that record. So as you had 4 lines, you'll have 4 lines, 4 records, rows. And I think that's all I wanted to cover with you guys. See how long it took me to create a simple CRUD application? And this is our REST API actually. And if I want to deploy this to our hosting environment like AWS or DigitalOcean, I can do that without any problems. And it already has good levels of security in there. And of course, there's a few more vulnerabilities, like you just noticed. We were able to create our user without any ID, and it's going to be exact same thing for our vehicle as well. I can create a vehicle. There's not a vehicle. I'm just gonna have multiple IDs in there that really do nothing. So whenever you'll be doing something like that, you'll have to validate if the information you have received is accurate or not. And this is not a bug, actually, and it's not a feature. That is something that this is how just Feathers does things, and that is just something for you to take care of yourself. And yeah, again, it's not a bug simply because it doesn't break our system, but has few vulnerabilities. And that is something that everybody have to do. It's not just because if Feathers doesn't do this, there are others who do that. That's not true at all. You'll always have to set up validation yourself. That's about it. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.